Welcome again to Coastal Matters. This is a monthly program co-produced by the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy with Nantucket Community Television. I'm Charlie Walters. My guest today is Carl Sjolound, who has been fishing commercially on Nantucket since age 12. You have a lot to tell us, Carl.
Well, yeah, I got my first license when I was 12, and Charlie Sales and I were very good buddies, and he was 13, and we were, quote, like wharf rats. You know, we loved the water, loved being around the waterfront, and even before that, we were opening scallops after schools.
So this license was for scalloping and scalloping only?
Well, I think it, and it said eels. I think it said eels on it too, you know. But they were $5, and when we went to, we would go down the town building to get them those days, and you'd see the town clerk to get the license. So when we went in to get a license, they didn't know if they should sell it to us. So they said, well, we'll have to see about that, because, you know, like I say, I was 12, he was 13. So they said, we'll have to ask the selectmen. So I guess we might have went down there on Tuesday, and Wednesday night was selectmen meeting, and they said, somebody brought it up that two young fellows come in looking if they could buy a commercial license. And in those days, there was always one or two fellows that were on the selectmen that were scalloping, you know. And they said, well, those young fellows are ambitious enough to go, let them go. So we got our license. We got a license in at 12 and 13. And we had a rickety old boat and a small outboard, and we could scallop there on Saturdays in those days. So we'd go every Saturday no matter what, and school vacation, and then when we get in high school, we bought a Jeep truck, four-wheel drive Jeep truck, because you couldn't, that was about the only vehicle that had four-wheel drive in those days, power wagons and Jeep trucks. So we had our license, you know, had our driver's license. So we would skip school and do all those kind of things, you know. Anytime it was early dismissal, we'd give it right down to the dock and jump in the boat and go. And I can remember when I was in high school, because the days are getting longer, and we would get out at 2:30, and I kept my boat in Warren's Landing, and as soon as that school bell rang, I jumped in my car and give it a dramatic it, and I could scallop there in front there in Warren's Landing until it got dark.
Really?
Yeah. Of course, we were getting probably the cheapest scallops I ever sold when I first started was 55 cents a pound.
55 cents?
55 cents a pound.
Now today, this is July 2016.
Yeah.
What would it be today?
Well, last winter, I fished all last winter. You know, a lot of guys said it was a hard winter. Well, it wasn't that. You gotta go and you gotta keep focused, you know. And what really was the big thing last winter, the season of 15 and 16, was that a lot of guys dropped out because there's so much work on the island. And the price, I think, opened around 15 a pound. And it slowly went up all winter because a lot of demand and less supply was coming in. And come late February and March, we were getting $20 a pound.
Really?
$20 a pound. I mean, it sounds like a lot, which it is. I mean, that's the highest I ever got. But it's a 12 to 13 hour day. Now you won't get a plumber or electrician to come to your house to work for 13 hours straight. You know, so you know, you get up early in the morning, you go and you know, you do it the best you can. At $20 a pound, towards the end, you're lucky to get the 5 bushels. That's the limit. 5 bushels per license, 2 licenses to a boat. And if you got 5, you had a good day. But if you get anything over 3, that was a good day. You know, decent days pay, but you got to like it. I like it. I mean, I don't.
You must like it.
I do like it. I like the challenge. I like looking for them. I like finding them. I love being out in my boat. It's so peaceful. You know, I mean, we fish in all kinds of weather. I've been through ice. I've been through the whole shooting match, like anybody that's been at it a while. You take the good with the bad. You know, we call it the rocks and the shoals. You know.
I want to hear what else you have fished for, either commercially or non-commercially, in addition to scallops.
Well, my father had a trawler here. He had it built, well, when I was a kid, yeah, he had a trawler built, named it after me. He had it built in the Fairhaven, Mass. In 1946, right after the war. Previous to that, he had another dragger built in New Jersey in 1936. He had her for 10 years, then he sold her, and then he built the bigger boat. And I would fish with him in the summertime. Of course, we go to George's in those days, you know.
George's Bank.
George's Bank, or fish on the shoals, you know, Great South Channel in on the shoals. It depended on what they were after, and it depended on the phase of the moon, because on the Nantucket Shoals, when you get the full moon or new moon, the tide runs very strong. But out on George's, it's not quite so bad. So I fished with him, but I remember the last year I fished with him before he sold the boat and retired, because he had spent his whole life at sea. He went to sea when he was 14.
And he was from Norway.
He was from Norway.
He was not a Nantucketer.
Oh, no, no.
Not a native-born Nantucketer.
Oh, no, no, no. No, he was from Norway. I can remember the year I fished with him, we could not get 8 cents a pound for flounders. Yeah, we could not get 8 cents a pound. I mean, that was it. I mean, you know, codfish was, you know, maybe 7 cents, like that. But that was it. I mean, you know.
What else were you catching in those days?
Well, most of the time it was flounders, codfish, haddock. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, that was the thing. You know, my father would try to make 30 trips a year to George's. It was just like, I mean, they would go 7 days, 8-day trips, come home 2 or 3 days, and right back out, you know. And they didn't have all the navigation stuff they have today. I don't know how they did it. I mean, honest the truth, I didn't know how they navigated so well.
Well, in those days, how many boats were leaving Nantucket to do that?
Oh, in the dragger
fishing?
fleet in the 50s and in early 60s, it must have been at least half a dozen Nantucket boats. Plus, there was always boats from New Bedford would stop in here, or one where you could go down to the wharf any day of the week, year round, and there'd be 2 or 3 draggers in there for some reason. Either local, or guys from New Bedford stop there in bad weather, you know, something like that.
How many local boats are there today?
There's only one, the Ruthie B.
Oh, Bill Blount. Yeah.
Yeah, and even when my father was fishing, Nantucket is really not set up for a commercial fisherman,
Right, yeah.
draggers, because there's nothing here. When I was a kid, they had the big ice plant, and there was boats here, but there was no facilities to do any repair. You couldn't haul the boat out, you know. My father and Captain Jack McDonald and Captain Tobe Fleming and them, they would always take 2 or 3 weeks off in July and have the boats in here and take everything out of the fish hole, all the pen boards and all that, and everything went on the dock. And the crew would paint the boats, paint everything, you know, pilot house, down forward, everything, paint the fish hole. And then, once they get all the gear back on, they'd go to New Bedford, haul the boat out, and the bottom was painted, the side was painted, maybe check the rudder, check the zincs, make sure the prop didn't have a nick in it, any repair like that. So they would take them, haul them up on a big cradle there in Fairhaven, and boy, when they were out of the water, you looked up at them, you said, boy, that's a big boat. You know, you could walk right underneath them, like.
How big was the boat?
She was 80 feet. That was kind of standard size. Yeah.
Now, when you're commercial scalloping these days, these years, how many Nantucket boats are out there?
Oh, bay scallops.
Bay scallops.
Well, the fleet has been, it's kind of steady right now, but when we peaked out, geez, I don't know, in the 80s, at least 125, 130 boats on a...
In the 80s.
On the 80s.
Yeah.
One thing that has affected that is you have to have your commercial license purchased before April 1st. So if you don't purchase your license before April 1st, you cannot go the following year, the
So
following season.
you've got to plan ahead. You can't just show up on a whim and decide you're going to do it.
Right, and one thing, I think that's a great idea, because if you're going to go at it, that's you know, you take the good with the bad. You know, you say, oh, gee, it's a bad season or it's not so good, but you have your license. So if you have the equipment, it's like an insurance policy.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember years ago, you could go down and get your license anytime during the season. So if it looked like it was a banana season, the boats would come out of the woodwork. You know, so they were like, you know, get them quick, get home, go back to my real job type thing, you know. But if the scallops are really thick, plentiful in those days, well, it was okay. But for the last, 15 years, I guess, you know, we've had some lean years and we've had some good ones, though.
In general, are there fewer scallops there now than there were in the 60s, 70s, or 80s?
Well,
I know it's going to vary a little bit from year to year, but
yeah, it varies a little bit from year to year. We have lost area up in Matticat and Tuckanut due to shoaling and erosion. And it's really hard to put your finger on that about, you know, it's like asking Phil Bartlett to grow more potatoes, but he has less and less acreage. And we can't get as many scallops if we don't have the area to fish on. We need to fish on the eelgrass beds. You won't really catch them on sandy bottom. They have to be on the eelgrass.
and eelgrass is affected by fertilizer getting into the harbor.
Yes, especially, well, it isn't just a fertilizer. It's a combination, you know, fertilizer, septic system, road runoff, things like that. Mm-hmm. The things that they're trying to address is the things that we can help control. We can't control acid rain. We can't control erosion around Tuckanut. Those things we don't have any control over. But the other things, percentage-wise, I don't really know which is the worst. But those things we have to address. And when John Stanton did the movie The Last Space Scallop, that was, I think, was very good because it brought really to the focus to a lot of people that had no idea what was happening to our harbor with pesticides and too much fertilizer, runoff, and all that. So it's making people aware, and the only way I can really go about it is like when we were young, Charlie, a lot of guys smoked. A lot of guys smoked. Almost every man smoked. I'd say probably 80% of the men smoked. Now you hardly ever see anybody.
That's right.
Between the cost and the health issue. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of comparing, you know, the fertilizer, the septics, the runoff, and things like that. It's just continuous education, make people aware. And I think, you know, with the movie, I heard some people, some really wealthy people after the movie said, now what can we do? What can I do? Mm-hmm. Which is great. It's bringing this focus in.
If someone's fishing in the harbor, whether it's commercially or non-commercial, besides bay scallops, what are they going to find out there?
Well, in the harbors you could find quahogs. You know, I dig quahogs 2 or 3 days a week in the summer months because I go out my boat, but I don't do it in this harbor. I do it in Matticat Harbor and Tuckanut.
Is that commercial?
Yes, yeah. The thing is, with the quahogs, the demand is for the raw bars, you know, the little necks and the cherry stones.
Yeah.
Which is great. And the big what we call chowder hogs, see, a lot of the restaurants don't make their own chowder today. It's too time-consuming, manpower, and all that. And you can buy the product from the mainland frozen, and you also can get the little necks and so forth from aquaculture farms. And you know, there's no way a person on Nantucket could supply, you know, the raw bars out here. Not when they sell, you know, I'd probably say 10, 12,000 a week, if minimum. I mean, the oyster farm up harbor, there's I think 6 or 7 guys raising oysters, and they're selling in the thousands a week.
Really?
Yeah.
What if you want a non-farmed oyster on Nantucket? Are you out of luck?
Well, they're pretty scarce. My experience, you'd have to you find them around where the fresh water and the salt water come, like at the mouth of the creeks, stuff like that, down front of Sale Seafood, down around that area, maybe outside of Poper's Harbor. You don't seem to find them right in the harbor. You know, we don't hardly ever get one in the scallop dredge. Sometimes we get some really ancient shells, really thick shells, and you can get them. They've got them in years past in Cascada Pond.
Really?
Cascada Pond, yeah. Oh, when I was just a young kid, when I was opening for the Andrewses, they scalloped in there almost all winter in Cascada Pond.
No kidding, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and they used to bring in these oysters that big.
Is that right?
And yes, honest
That's
to God.
huge. That's amazing.
And they were reddish because of the iron around that pond.
Uh-huh.
And they were so big, they'd put them on the edge of the bench and hit the end of it with a little hammer so they could get the knife in.
Really?
Yeah, yeah,
Isn't that something?
yeah.
Now, what about mussels? When I was a little boy, nobody wanted mussels.
Yeah.
Now you go to a restaurant, and every restaurant in town has mussels on the menu.
Yes. The mussels are a strange thing out here. 2 or 3 years ago, I could fill this room with mussels, with a couple of scallop dredges. But the next winter, when I was scalloping in Matticat, I've never seen so many eider ducks. And eider ducks feed on them.
Huh.
Come that spring, you couldn't get enough mussels to put in a cup, because they can digest the whole thing. But when they come back fast.
The mussels that I've seen down at the Jetties Beach are
No.
different from the mussels you'll see out in the Hallover area out near Wauwinet. The ones in Wauwinet seem to be bigger and a different color and a different taste.
Well, there's 2 kinds. There's the ridge mussel that's is against the marsh and a bank, and then you got the blue mussel,
Right.
which you get in the restaurant or what. You know, almost, I would say 100% of the mussels that are served in Nantucket farm raised from PEI and other areas. The mussels we have here, they grow on the bottom. In other spots, they grow them off the bottom. And when they grow on the bottom, they get a little crab inside of them out here. And people don't like the little crab. It's
Well-
symbiotic, yeah, whatever you call that.
We'll talk about that. Why is the crab there? Why isn't it there with some mussels?
Yeah, well, I think because the mussels you find around here are on the bottom. It's natural. It's not raised. They're not raised, per se. And the ones you get up from PEI and other aquaculture farms, they do it in Rhode Island. I saw a huge aquaculture farm. They're suspended off the bottom. I don't know if they do it in cages. I know they do it in long strings, and they attach to each other. But somehow the crab, because they're bottom, they don't get into the mussel. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt the mussel. It's like the birds that are on the back of an elephant, eating the ticks, and the elephant don't care about the bird, and the mussel doesn't care about the little crab.
And we shouldn't care if we're eating one in a
No,
restaurant
it's a little
and
protein
we
with
find
your
a crab.
seafood. There's nothing there to hurt you. Yeah.
I think it's this fall, September of 2016, they're going to start redoing the jetty.
Yes.
I guess the East Jetty first, maybe?
I think so. That's the lowest.
Now, once they get that job finished, that's going to improve the flow of water in and out of the harbor. It's going to increase the rate of
Flushing,
speed.
yes.
What's that going to do to the fisheries of the harbor?
Well, I heard it will increase the current by 3/4 of a knot. It's hard to say if it will. It certainly can't hurt. It's the flushing, they've been, I guess the scientists have figured out that the better the flow, get the water turned over. Some of the problem up at like Wauwinet, because you've got two shoals. You've got Five Finger Shoal coming from the north, and you've got Pockama going like this, and you have to come up and kind of go around there. A lot of times, well, not a lot of times, but it takes a while for that water to come down, you know. So anything that will pull it down is certainly going to hurt, certainly going to help, you know.
Will help it keep cleaner, and what else?
Well, it'll keep cleaner and get some cleaner water in, you know, circulation, yeah.
Now, you talked about your father, who was from Norway and came here to fish. Talk some more about your family. How far back does this go in your family?
Well, on my mother's side, we trace it to 1663 from England. It was William Worth on my mother's side of the family. So I guess I'm 15th or 16th generation, you know, on that side.
And have they all fished?
No, well, no, I'm sure a lot of them went whaling. I mean, you know, on my mother's side of the family, sure. Because the first whale ship to go into the Pacific was Captain Paul Worth. Now, I don't know if he was a relative or not, but it was quite a common name in those days. But you were saying something about the jetties. My grandfather from Norway was on a big square rigger. This is what my father told me. And he jumped ship in New York because it was, quote, in those days, a hard ship.
Meaning?
If you read like anything like 2 years before the mast and all that, some of them big sailing ships, they were tough ships. Tough meaning hard crew, hard mates and captains. So he jumped ship in New York or Boston. And I don't know how it happened, but he got into the U.S. Lighthouse Service. Because we have a picture of him. His name was Carl also. It said U.S. Lighthouse Service on his uniform. They were in charge of building or repairing a lot of the jetty. So he somehow...
The Nantucket jetty you're talking about.
Nantucket jetty. So they claimed the rocks came from Connecticut for the jetty. And that cut in the jetty wasn't there then. And
you mean the small boat opening on the east jetty?
That wasn't there. So he worked on that jetty until I guess he made enough money, then went back home to Norway because he had 5 children back in Norway.
So what made your father come here? Meaning to Nantucket, not just the U.S.
Well, my father went to sea when he was 14. He was in a small little town in Norway on Oslo Fjord, right up to the big fjord that runs up to the capital. He was on the western side of the fjord because we've been there. And he told me that it was one-room schoolhouse, but there was too many kids. So they go every other day. So school was 6 days a week, but you only went 3. In those days when you were 14, you were considered a man. You were confirmed or whatever. There's a Lutheran faith over there. So you're 14, you're a man. You got to go make your way. So my father got on a merchant ship. And the name of the merchant ship was Christian Knutsen, the name of the ship. They left Norway. It was what they call a tramp steamer. Tramp steamer means it had no certain route, you know. They would go where cargo was available. Now this was in the early 20s, right after the First World War, when things were really bad. That's one reason he left Norway. There was nothing going on. They hadn't found the oil, you know, or anything like that. So that ship left Norway, and it traveled all around the world. And I have his log at home. It's all written in Norwegian, of course. But he went to all different countries. He was in Africa, he was in South America, he was in other parts of Europe, all through this coast, both this coast. They had a contract to carry logs from Oregon and Vancouver over to Japan. Well, that ship never went back to Norway. He was on that ship for 7 years. Never went back to see the family, nothing. Never saw his mother or father. So they were in, I guess it was in Boston. They had some cargo in Boston or something. And somehow through letters, he could write back and forth. I'm sure he sent money to his mother. That there was a second cousin over in the United States. A lot of Norwegians came to this country because things were bad. It was just like the Irish, you know. But a lot of them settled in Minnesota and Wisconsin because those are the farmer ones. And the fishermen Norwegians settled like in Fairhaven and New Bedford and New York. So he got off the ship there. He said, I'm going to take a little break. So he found out there was a second cousin here in Nantucket. And he got a little confused. I think he landed in Nantasket first. But, well, you
That's
know,
a little different.
You know, when you only go to school when you're 14, and you know, and they weren't teaching English, so he landed here, and his cousin's husband had a fishing boat out of here, and his name was Olaf Anderson, and he was a Norwegian, and they lived right up on Gay Street. And he had four children, Olaf did, and he had a tremendous reputation of being top skipper. So my father got a job with him, and the name of the boat was the Dagny, named after his wife. And he fished with him, with Olaf, for probably 4 or 5 years, and he even ran the boat for Olaf. And then Olaf sold the boat, and then he got another boat called the Sea Ranger. Get bigger. My father was on the Sea Ranger. I have a picture of the Sea Ranger coming in solid ice at the end of Brent Point Light in 1933, and people walking out to the boat.
Really?
My father said they got in here, and they couldn't get out for 6 weeks. She was frozen.
Really?
Once they
That
get into the
long?
dock, he says it's the only thing that killed the cockroaches. was the cold. Yeah. And so he fished with him for a few years until he bought his own boat. But Olaf was all his focus was on fishing. And my father said, we came in one time, it was Easter Sunday. They had tore up their nets quite a bit. They always carry spare sections. The net, the whole net is sections. You know, you have different sections of the net, and they all have names. But of course, the bottom part of the net gets tore up the worst because it's on the bottom. The top part doesn't get that too much. But if you're fishing on really hard, rocky bottom, you know, you go through a lot of twine. We call it twine, it's webs, you know. So Olaf had a shanty here. That whole island service off south side, north side, they were all shanties. They opened scallops in there. A lot of the fishermen had their gear in there. My father had one there when I was a kid. So Olaf put the spring line on the dock, never took the boat out of gear, and told one guy, you go into that shanty and get a big thing of twine and keep on firing on until I tell you. As soon as they had enough, he put her in neutral, flipped the line off, and went out. Wouldn't let the guys go home for Easter Sunday dinner or nothing.
It was a different time.
That was a different time. Yeah.
Before we go, I want you to talk about your son, who is continuing the tradition. Now, where is he fishing?
He fishes up in the Bering Sea. He's got the fishing genes in that one. He went to Mass Maritime, and he did 4 years at Mass Maritime, and he was first job he had was on his internship he was on a 950-foot tanker bringing crude oil out of Valdez, Alaska, down into California, stuff like that. And he told me the second trip going up, it was Christmas Eve, and it was blowing so hard that 950-foot tanker could not go ahead. That's how rough it was. Yeah.
What kind of winds are we talking about? I mean, that's amazing.
It is amazing, but you got to remember, you never really want to push. I don't care what the boat is. push them when it's really bad. You know, a tanker that long is probably on 2 different waves at a time.
It would be, wouldn't it? Sure, yeah.
So you got to be very careful. You know, you push them too hard. You got to take it easy. You know, take it easy. You know, even with the fishing boats. You know, take it easy. You know, I mean, you got to. Else you're gonna destroy something. You know, you blow all the windows out of the pilot house, and you know that's not uncommon. You know, but you got to be careful. So then you got a job with a coastal tug. Going anywhere from Puerto Rico to Nova Scotia. And it's one of these tugs that push the barge. It goes right in, locks in.
Huh.
And they were transporting liquid asphalt. They got to keep the asphalt hot so you can pump it out. Mm-hmm. If you can keep it hot, it'd be like a rock. It'd be just like the road. That's what it's for. So that was the 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. They went all over, all up and down the whole coast. You know. But he said at that time, he was only 23 or 24. He said it was kind of boring, Dad. I said, well, you want to do something else? Go
Boring
ahead.
for him, maybe.
Boring for him, yeah. So,
pretty exciting to us landlubbers.
yeah, so when he was at the Mass Maritime, they have companies come and try to interview. You know, one thing about Mass Maritime, about 95% of the kids that graduate get a job when they graduate, and good paying jobs. It's not for everybody, but you know, and it's regimental. There's no foolishness, you know, inspections and the whole thing. It's just like almost like a boot camp. So he got a job on the West Coast. It's called Leader Fisheries. They have 4 what they call long liners. They set a long line out, which every 6 feet has a shot line with a hook on it, just like they did years ago when they were dory fishing out of Gloucester on the schooners. Basically the same thing, but it's all automatic. Mm-hmm. So this company has 4. He's been on 2 of them. He switches back and forth, depends on when the ship. The one he's on most is called the Northern Leader. That's the new one. They just did a documentary. I don't know if you've ever seen that Deadliest Catch on TV where they do the crabbing. Mm-hmm. Well, it's the same company came on the ship he's on and did the film. It's called Mighty Ships, but it hasn't been shown in the U.S., I don't think, yet.
And is he on that program?
Yes. Yeah.
Really?
He's the mate on there. So when the skipper's turned in, he runs the boat and all that. She costs $35 million. She carries 1.7 million pounds of codfish, and they don't come in until she's full. And in the 2.5 years he's been there, they've only stopped fishing for 12 hours because of weather. God. So, and they fish year round.
When that show comes on in the U.S., you've got to tell the newspapers about this, because a lot of us are going to want to see that.
Yeah.
That's fabulous.
Yeah. So that's what he does. That's what he seems to like. And what they do, he'll do like 2 or 3 trips in a row. I mean, it's grueling. It's really grueling because they don't get off when they come in. When the boat is full, they come back. Everything is frozen. You know. They unload the frozen fish in Dutch Harbor, Alaska. While the fish is being unloaded, they're getting the fuel. The food has already been called ahead. The whole shoot, 25 in the crew. And as soon as the fish is out, some of the crew rotate, not all 25. Some will rotate, maybe, I don't know, 10, 15, you know, so coming off, coming back on. And then they go right back out.
So how much time might it be between setting foot on land? What's the longest he's have to be out there?
Well, this spring he called me late. He calls me quite often because he's right up in the pilot house, got all them satellite phones and all that fancy stuff, you know. And I think it was early March. He says, I was thinking about making another trip. So he'd have more time home in the summertime. I said, well, that's a good idea. What the heck's going on here in March and April? You know, it's still, you know, nothing's really moving. So that's what he did. So one of the skippers from the other boat called and said, are you still up here? Because they figure, you know, after a while. Mm-hmm.
Were we talking weeks, months?
Oh, yeah, months.
Months without setting foot on shore?
Yeah, well, it might run up to the post office, but that's it. They don't stay in overnight.
Huh.
The only time if the crew flying out to Dutch Harbor from Anchorage, bad weather and the plane can't go. That's happened. But it's only like maybe 24 hours at the most, and the boat goes right back out. They take 60 tons of bait. It's squid.
Mm-hmm.
And the line is over 50 miles long that they
50
set.
miles.
50 miles long, over 50 miles long.
Carl, this has been fascinating. I wish I had more time. Can I get you to come back sometime?
Yeah.
I feel as though we're just scratching
Yeah.
the surface here. This is
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about the Andrew Doria. How's that?
okay.
Okay. I saw it in the paper today, the Andrew Doria. When the Andrew Doria sunk, my father was in from a trip. So the boat was at the dock in Nantucket, at the old Island Service Wharf. And I think it must have been a day or two after the Andrew Doria sunk. I don't know the details. I was only 12, 13 years old, I guess. But somehow, you remember Mike Todd?
Sure.
Yeah. I can remember him. He asked my father to take 2 or 3 55-gallon drums, like the fuel came in, empty drums, and put buoys on out there of where she sunk. And I said, gee, can I go, Dad? And he says, yeah, sure, you can go. Come on. So we went out, we steamed out, got there in the morning, and there was some debris floating around, Not much, I mean. So we dropped these 55-gallon drums and just turned around and came back. Now, of course, like I say, I was just a young kid. It was sort of like trying to put them, maybe pinpoint, because after the collision, she stayed afloat for a long time, and no one ever really got an accurate bearing where she sunk. So that was that. Maybe a year later, 2 years later, the heir of Gimbel's department store in New York knew that my father had gone out there and set the buoys. Of course, the buoys are long gone, and said him and another young man, they wanted to dive on it, take pictures for Life magazine. So I can remember they had all the tanks, they had the compressor and all that stuff on my father's boat. It was summertime, July, I think it was. And Freddie Chambers was the engineer, been the engineer with my father for long. Len Block was the mate, and Charlie Glidden was the cook. So the rest of the crew stayed ashore. And Mr. Block's daughter was a nurse, so she went along with them. Of course, there's only 11 bunks on the boat. And then there was the divers, and I don't know who, maybe assistants with them, I don't remember. So they went out to the Andrew Doria. Well, it's like you going from here to Hyannis and find a sunken skiff on the bottom. There's nothing there. Where do you think it is? My father had in those days it was high tech. Today you wouldn't, it was primitive. It was a depth recorder that turned around like this and had the numbers, like that, 1, 2, 3, well, it was like 10, 20, 30, all the way around, like a clock. This thing would spin, and it had a little light bulb in it. And what it was, an echo off the bottom. So out there with the Andrew Doria, it's about 45 fathoms of water. There's 6 feet to a fathom. And the bottom is fairly flat. Well, you can't send a diver down and walk around the bottom, because at 45 fathoms, that's about the max that those guys could dive at. And you got current there too. So the only thing they did was set up some kind of a grid system. My father had a rough idea where she was, probably within a couple of miles, or 5 miles maybe. So they went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for 3 days. And they kept on looking at that machine, flash it, flash it, flash it, And all of a sudden, Instead of 45, it went right down, boom, then back to 45. Oh, something's down there. So they went back, there again. So yeah. So they got a buoy out, big buoy, flag buoy, like what the draggers always used. Got set up. And after they got set up like that, they put one of the dories, the lifeboat, over the side. I've got pictures of that at home. And the diver went down the buoy line, you know. And when he went down the buoy line, the anchor from the buoy landed right on the bridge of the Andrea.
Really?
Now that's pretty damn good. Huh?
That is.
Yeah.
That is.
So that was for Life magazine. And I have a copy of that magazine. And I have pictures of the fellows helping. I have to bring them out to the museum, you know, helping the divers come in out of the water. And when they came back, the chief engineer had a big patch over his eye like that. Not on his eye, but over here, you know, on the eyelid. One of the divers was coming up, and he was being chased by a shark. And he had his knife out. They had built a little platform off the side of the boat where the divers could come up and get the tanks off and sit there for a while. Mm-hmm. Well, the shark was coming after him really fast. So the engineer was there to grab him. But the guy had his knife up like that. And it poked him right up through like that. But not his eye.
Boy's lucky, isn't he?
Right there in the bone. Of course, Lem Block's wife, the daughter was a nurse. So they patched him up, you know. But it didn't do it. It didn't. Thank God it didn't hit him in the eye. But that's a true story. Yeah, I couldn't go. My father. I said, "Can I go? Can I go?" And he says, "No, we don't have enough room." I said, "Well, I'll sleep anywhere. I'll sleep down in the engine room." No, we got enough people, you know. So I couldn't go on that trip. But I've got pictures that they took back home. Yeah.
That's a fascinating story,
Yeah.
and you are going to come back and tell us more.
To be continued.
Exactly. Carl Sjolound, thank you for joining me.
Well,
This has been
you're welcome.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
For Coastal Matters, I'm Charlie Walters. Thank you for joining us. Please tune in again next time.